Vincent van Gogh was one of the world's most influential artists. At the age of 27, he discovered his true gift. And for the next few years, he produced literally hundreds of works of art, many of which still have huge relevance today. He died tragically at the age of 37, but in his short time on this earth, he is widely reported to have discovered the true meaning of his life. Your profession is what you are put on this earth to do, with such passion and such intensity that it becomes spiritual in calling. Now, I would expect that few, if any of us, could claim to be to quality management what Vincent van Gogh was to the world of art. But I think the essence of his discovery has something that can speak to us all today. The world in which we now live and in which professions are plying their trade is changing so rapidly that continual professional development has never been so important. Patterns of work are being fractured already by COVID and being remoulded by digital technology. And all this in a world where we have rising geopolitical tension, trade restrictions, shortage of key resources, and uncontrollable change to our climate, the one in which we live. Now, you may be tired of hearing some of these messages, and to a certain extent I am, but that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to frighten us all into responding, just that anyway. I think there's a more important question we should be asking. What should we, as leaders in our disciplines, be doing about all this? The world will rely upon bright, highly qualified professionals across all disciplines to face up to some of these challenges, navigate a path through to a brighter future. So my aim over this 30 minutes is to outline the nature and extent of some of these challenges and to tell you what the CQI is doing to help the quality profession. So let's look a little bit more at some of these forces for change. The rate of change of digital technology and services worldwide shows no sign of abating. A report issued last year is forecasting that the global spend on digital transformation and services will top $3.4 trillion by 2026. That will put it 7th in the league of countries by GDP, just ahead of France. It will constitute roughly 3% of the world economy on its own, and by my calculation, it will deliver 8% aggregate growth in world economy over the next 3 years. And added to this, there is a growth in robotic automation. Now, we're all used to, aren't we, of seeing pictures and films of robots on manufacturing lines, but they are creeping more into the non-industrial world, into healthcare, cleaning, logistics, agriculture, hospitality, and yes, inspection. In 2020, the International Federation of Robotics published a report where they discovered that in the industrial sector, the rate of growth of introduction of new technology was growing by 31%. What was more interesting is that the rate of growth in the non-industrial sector had already outstripped that and was at 37%. And also, we've talked about it a bit already today, the rate of growth in artificial intelligence is also still at quite a staggering rate. I shared this graph at last year's event, and it shows the forecast for the market for artificial intelligence, that is, the investment in AI, up to 2030 in the next 7.5 years. Already quite dramatic, as you can see, an exponential path. I've managed to find a similar forecast to update that to this year's figures, and already each and every year will be outstripped. The total in 2030 forecast to be 16% above what we thought it would be last year. By then, 2030, we could have 9 times the amount of artificial intelligence activity that we've got today. But powerful AI needs powerful computer processing, and the world of hardware development is no slouch. Now, students of computer science will remember something called Moore's Law. It was invented by Gordon E. Moore. He was one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation, and in 1965 he made an interesting observation. He discovered that the number of transistors on a microchip was doubling every 2 years, and with it, processing speed. Now, what you see here is a graph in a logarithmic scale produced by a research institute in San Francisco that shows that Moore's Law has held for 57 years. But in 2012, something happened. And the rate in change of computer processing power growth is not doubling every 2 years, it's doubling every 3.4 months. Now, if we believe this, by the time we come back to IQA 2024, we could have computers that are 8 times more powerful than today, and along with it, artificial intelligence and other modeling techniques. But whilst we marvel at what technology can do, data centers are helping to warm up the Earth. What you see here now is a plot of global average surface temperature in what we call the post-industrial age. And this topic has already come up in one of the sessions this morning. What it calculates or shows is the average in-year temperature for each year compared to the average for the whole of the 20th century. If it's a blue histogram bar, then the average was less than the 20th century. If it's red, the average is more. You can see for yourself what this is telling us. First of all, the world is hotting up. On average, 2 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.1 degrees centigrade more than it was in the post-industrial age. Secondly, the rate of change is increasing. The amount of increase in average global surface temperature each decade is twice as fast in growth as it was before 1981, twice after 1981 as it was before. 2022 was the 6th hottest year on record, and the 10 warmest years have all occurred since 2010. Folks, we are losing this battle, and we've known about it for a long time. And if that's not enough, the world is battling high inflation, increasing protectionist foreign policy, and very sadly, the biggest land war in Europe since 1945. But you could ask, why should I care about this? I mean, isn't this all so vast? Aren't these issues so superordinate that there's not a lot that little old me can do about this? Isn't it just best to keep our head down and hope that we discover some new norm? And I'd argue not. You see, I think this is up to everyone to play their part, and professions must lead the way, and ours is no exception. So you might say to me, well, that's fine, but what can we do as quality professionals? And again, this morning, we've heard how our profession touches every aspect of an organization. So you could ask, couldn't you, who's going to assure the introduction of this new technology? Who's going to help translate these superordinate risks into operational risk and assurance and control activities? Who's going to advise on the structuring and the restructuring of businesses that will then ensure that quality outcomes remain? Who's going to help build and ensure that agility in the organization remains and innovative solutions are found, again, to these rapidly changing contextual factors? And who's going to describe the right culture that acts as the conscience of the business in these turbulent times and protects us from moral hazard. If it's not us, who? And if it's not now, when? Now you might say that's fine, but we in the quality profession aren't generally in the right place to do stuff about this. And I would agree to a certain extent. In 2014, the CQI ran a survey of its members asking them about certain aspects of the profession. And 5 messages came out about the way that we were perceived. First of all, quality just rarely seems to be on the board's agenda. For some reason, we haven't generally acquired that trusted advisor status that you might see in, say, the legal profession or the finance profession. It's almost as if quality is seen more as an occupation rather than a profession. Quality practice is misunderstood still. I remember working for a large multinational manufacturing organisation some years ago. They were having problems with field failures of their products. And the CEO said to me, Mike, he said, I can't understand why this is happening. We've got an ISO 9001 certificate. I thought we'd got quality. And I had to explain to him, it's not like an immunisation jab. There's more to quality than a certificate on the wall. Quality was seen more as a defence mechanism, an operational tool, a policing function, rather than being part of the strategic weaponry of the business, as we talked about in the first session this morning. And maybe this was because there was a little bit too much emphasis on assurance activity and less, say, on governance and improvement. It was almost as if we'd lost some aspects of our natural agenda to other functions. The profession was also struggling a bit to be heard. And I think that was due in part to the fact that there's a tendency we can find, probably with all professions, I would say, of lapsing into technical language and quality speak, not talking the language of the business when we're trying to get a message across. And finally, and again we've talked about this morning, the big question, what is the true value of quality and quality management? And we know this is a challenge, don't we? But it seemed to be like quality was seen more as adding layers of bureaucracy and cost rather than driving value. And you know, in my work as head of profession, 8 years on from there, yes, there are exceptions, but generally I'm not sure whether that picture has changed dramatically. And why do I say that? Well, the CQI ran its Workforce Insight Survey in 2020. We asked our members and had 2,380 responses as to a number of aspects of the profession and careers and skills shortages. And as you can see here, the kinds of technical and leadership competencies required to address some of what I've talked about are still in short supply. And leaders are struggling to get the right people to fill these roles. So if you accept all this, and you may not, I understand that, but if you do accept some or even all of this, then the next question is what needs to be done? How do we up our game? And why should the CQI be particularly bothered about this? Well, I would say it's fundamental to what we do. Our charter and our vision makes it our concern. We need to make sure that quality practice and professional competence are continually relevant and of benefit to the organisations in which our members work and the ones they serve. It's the heart of what we do. It is of paramount importance to us. And to be fair, it has been for a while. Back in 2014, the CQI launched its competency framework, a simple model of 5 interrelated aspects of competence: governance, assurance, improvement, leadership, and context. And over the last 8 years, I have discovered that actually it's had quite a lot of global interest. And in a recent survey, over 50% of those that responded said that they had accessed this at some time over the last 8 years, and that's encouraging. But in the face of these headwinds of change, is that enough? Well, let me take you back to when I first joined as the head of profession 3 years ago. I carried out a series of interviews. I spoke to other heads of profession around the world. I spoke to leading thinkers. I spoke to experts. I spoke to practitioners. And almost without exception, what came back to me was that we need to do something about the introduction of digital technology into quality, or we lovingly called Quality 4.0, the growing importance of environmental, social and governance goals for a business and the contribution that quality professionals can make to that, risk and how we manage risk. We've just had a whole session on that in a breakout this morning, and innovation. But one interview particularly stuck in my mind. I spoke to a young man. He was working in a manufacturing organisation, small organisation, in the second tier of an aerospace supply chain. And he'd just been promoted to quality manager. And he said, Mike, I don't know what I should be doing. I don't know the job and the role of a quality manager, because obviously he was in a small organisation, didn't have too many mentors. And I don't know what I've got to be good at. And I found that quite shocking, given all that what I've said. But then it dawned on me that whilst he had this to reference to, what he needed was a more detailed description of competence, something that would help him to address that particular concern. So given all of these factors, the CQI decided to update that framework to the second version, and that's what I'm now going to talk about, to renew it and refresh it. So in the summer of 2021, we set out on a project. The work was carried out by Catalyst Consulting, and it was subjected to a rigorous peer review by our research advisory panel, a group of experts, academics, senior people in the profession. We had a detailed scoping document to help us keep on track, and a set of design requirements, which you would all expect, of course, as quality professionals, that would help us understand the form and function of the new framework and how it would fit with some of the existing variants that we had, particularly in the rail and nuclear sector. Now, the main aim of this was to develop a detailed set of competencies that sat within those 9 elements: governance, assurance, leadership, etc. Our initial intent was to produce something that could operate and be useful pan-profession, and then at a later date, there may be some need to vary it depending upon sectors, depending upon whether those sector groups are interested in doing so. In turn, we needed some scale of progression. How could we measure the progression of competence along some kind of continuum? Already, we've seen that it's important that we understand some of the competencies that are emerging that are going to help our professionals make a contribution within the scope of their role to environmental, social and governance, Quality 4.0, etc., goals within their organisations. We recognised there were undergraduate, postgraduate and apprentice programmes, so we wanted to make sure that this work played its part in a continuum of development. And finally, whilst we know we have some technical language which is relatively unavoidable to use, we wanted to make sure this was written in plain English and that it also had an international appeal. And throughout the project, these design requirements remained a touchstone as we developed it. It followed a rigorous 4-stage process of design and test. In the first stage, we carried out a literature review. We asked really 3 main questions. What are the characteristics of a design of a competency framework in a professional development context? Secondly, what constitutes competence? How do you define and describe it? And we settled on 3 elements: skills, knowledge, and behaviours. And also, we wanted to eke out any relevant sources of competencies specific to the quality profession in the modern age. Armed with the outcomes there, we then carried out some benchmarking, looking at other professional models and sector variants, and of course, some of the key models that we refer to. However, the real engine room of design of this version of the competence framework was extensive consultation with the profession. The CQI boasts nearly 19,000 members from a broad range of roles with a unique global perspective on what quality professionals should do as well as do. We issued 3 separate calls for support with 4 options, and over 450 people responded, some saying that they would carry out more than 1 intervention. So this design can boast over 500 touch points with experts and professionals. And I say that we can truly claim that this has been built by the profession for the profession. So the initial list of competencies was developed by a combination of survey, in-depth interviews, focus groups, and workshops. And then that first set of competencies were subject to a test for omissions and gaps with reference to standards of quality excellence or sources of quality excellence like the ISO 9001 and other quality models that are attached to awards. Once we'd completed that work, we then subjected the version to 4 rigorous stages of test. In the first test, we looked at each element, like governance, for example, and made sure that there was a necessary and sufficient set of competencies within governance. Secondly, we tested them by tier to look for consistency, to make sure we didn't have, say, a more advanced competence in, say, governance compared to leadership, for example, just to make sure that there was that consistency. We then made sure that the demands of digital transformation and quality, ESG, risk and innovation were sufficiently captured at this stage. And finally, we tested it for readability using a classic plain English test. And we also sent it to a number of people for whom English was not their first language and carried out an international comprehension test. And in addition, several members carried out pilot self-assessments, and in every stage they said it was easy to use and they found it of value, irrespective of how advanced they felt they were in the profession. Something for everyone. And throughout this process, the design requirements were validated and signed off. And what has resulted now is what we call the profession map, which we are proud to launch today. And you'll have these little leaflets now on the tables that give you an overview. The primary purpose of this profession map is to provide a simple and easily navigable statement of competencies within each of those 5 elements. As you can see here, each element has 3 to 5 key components of competence that sit below those elements. And you can start to see some of them for yourselves, things I'm sure that you would expect. In turn, each of these key components of competence has a next level of breakdown called components of competence. And they will be, or they are, arranged across 4 tiers of progression. Tier 1 is really what you would call a foundational level. This is where somebody in Tier 1 is starting to develop awareness and understanding They're starting to demonstrate that they can apply the knowledge in less complex situations and in a supervised state. Tier 2 is then showing an increasing level of confidence in application, less supervised in less complex situations, and in those more complex situations being mentored and supervised through it, and starting to contribute a bit to how approaches could be improved. In Tier 3, we then have full competence in application, and we're starting to see a role for developing others and contributing to the design of new approaches. And Tier 4 is where there is really confidence to lead and to shape and to advise. And that's really where those in strategic roles will find a home, as well as subject matter experts. Now, it is important to recognize that the goal isn't to get level 4 in everything. A senior manager may have level 4 competence in governance, for example, in designing strategies and business models, but may have a level 2 or 3 in assurance because they pay somebody else to do that. So each role will have its own distinct profile. And your role, your job will have a profile. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So let's look at what you might find if you scurry away from here and click on the website. Let's take the element of context, extremely important effectively in the background for today, isn't it? We're discovering how important it is that we understand more about the context. The first key competence, the first key component of confidence is customers and marketplace. This is where we expect that the professional understands the relevant factors affecting customers and the marketplace relating to quality management in the marketplace in which their organization resides. This will then be further explained by a series of components of competence across 4 levels. And you can see they are written as statements. You can, you know, you understand. And it's expected that each professional will be able to use this to assess their tier of competence against each of those 18 key components of competence sitting within the 5 elements. Now, this raises an important point. This tool has been designed to assist in continuous professional development. It's not written as a universal standard that all people in the same role across a number of contexts could be compared to. That might be a shock to you, but it isn't. If we tried to do that, it would be too difficult and far too lengthy, and it would be questionable in value. You see, the world is moving so fast. By the time we had agreed that, some of those roles may well have disappeared or been replaced. No, this is about determining your competence profile for the role you're in and where you want to go in terms of both expanding yourself within that role and developing your career beyond where you are now. This way, well, we've got something that we can get started with, but we can develop it and build on it. We can use it to harness more perspective and expertise around our global community. Now, one way that professionals might choose to do this is to develop some kind of picture of their profile. Here is an example using like a spider diagram. So they've gone through an assessment process, determined which tier they are against each of the 18, and you have some kind of a profile. But importantly, of course, what you want to do is to determine, where am I going? What does my target look like? Where should I be? And therefore, where do I need to develop? Now, at this stage, what you see in the professional map, and you'll find on the website, is it at a certain level. In order to then be able to carry out an accurate assessment, you'll need access to something that is appearing hopefully within this year, and it's still under discussion, and that is a self-assessment tool. That self-assessment tool has within it even more detail below what you see here. So if you take each statement within those components of competence at each tier, you'll be able to click on that within the self-assessment tool and there will be more detail. That's where you'll discover how to nudge the blue to red. What are the things I need to know? There will be lists of knowledge, and that knowledge will be linked to sources of learning and development to help you. What skills do I need? And all the behaviours are all grouped together within the leadership element. So much of what we've been talking today about how leaders work differently, how we need to have an impact, that will appear in that element. And finally, we have an ambition at some point to see if we can develop within the context of this some typical role profiles, so that that young man I spoke to will now have an answer to his question. What does a quality manager tend to do? So how does this help address some of the issues I've raised today? Well, when you look at the self-assessment tool, you will find almost 300 individual statements of competence that relate to the 4 areas that have cropped up time and time again when I've talked to people around the world. Competencies in how we, within the scope of our work in quality management, can impact the environmental, social and governance goals within the businesses that we operate. How we can transform what we do through digital technologies. How we can become more agile and innovative, and how we can better get involved in and help to manage the increasing complexity of risk. And also within the perceptions that I talked about. Well, we might struggle to get quality on the board agenda, but I doubt whether things like ESG, digital transformation, innovation and risk management won't be. So if we are having an impact in those areas, is there not an opportunity for us to start to have a voice and to be recognised for what we do and uniquely contribute? A better understanding of the context of the business and in which we work, and some more leadership skills, more mature leadership skills, will help us, no doubt, to make ourselves heard better, to articulate in a better way the messages we want to convey. One of the key components of competence in the governance element is how to develop and deliver strategies, policies, and plans. So in there you'll find a whole stack of guidance about how to do that, a link to knowledge that we'll help to build. Well, if we are building strategies for quality that are linked to the organisation's plan, we are going to be communicating that quality is not just a defensive weapon, but it's a strategic tool. Well, the profession map itself, just by looking at it, is better communicating what quality professionals do. So we might have an opportunity to address some of the myths. And finally, the CQI intends in the next strategic round of the next 5 to 7 years to really try and address this question: how do we articulate the value of quality management? And this is a big ask, and I'll be looking for some more help from folk like you. But if we are involved more in improvement, in building agile businesses, in innovation, surely we're going to be delivering more value, aren't we? So in summary, we know that the world is changing faster and more dramatically than any of us can even imagine. Professions must lead the way in adapting the world of work. The quality profession is no different. But there's work to be done for all of us in totality in developing competence to meet those challenges. This profession map gives us a way forward. It's the result of a 9-month rigorous process of inquiry. But it's not a 100% solution. We wouldn't be arrogant enough to say that. There will be gaps. There is room for improvement. But it's something to build on. The most important thing is that we actually get on and use it. And in doing so, every person that's been involved to date, and every person that is involved in developing this further, can be justifiably proud to be part of the worldwide conversation of research that will make our profession not just fit for today, but fit for the future. Thank you for listening.